He's dead now, Mom, so I own everything, Eric said into the microphone. At my husband's funeral, in front of our pastor, in front of our friends. And then he pulled out the will. But the real blow came after, under flickering hallway lights. You've got 30 days to move out. Dad didn't trust your memory. My son, my daughter, both of them gone cold. The house, the bank accounts, even Walter's car stripped it all. I hadn't even opened my husband's death certificate. But here's what Eric didn't know. Walter left me something he never found. And once the lawyer saw it, the game changed fast. I wasn't about to fade quietly. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Margaret Cooper and I'm 70 years old. Each morning I wake up alone in the Georgia home where Walter, my husband, and I spent our whole married life together, making my way through quiet routines we once shared. My late husband Walter was my high school sweetheart. We had 47 beautiful years before cancer took him last month. Our son Eric, a real estate broker in Atlanta, used to join us for Sunday breakfasts, but those visits grew sparse after Walter's diagnosis. I still tend our little garden where Walter's favorite wooden bench sits weathered and worn. Eric keeps talking about optimizing our assets these days, his voice carrying that cold, calculated tone that makes my shoulders tense. What gives me peace is knowing Walter was always 3 steps ahead when it came to protecting our future. But let me start from the beginning. The morning of Walter's funeral dawned exactly like he would have hated, all gray skies and heavy silence hanging over our little corner of Georgia. I stood at our bedroom mirror, fingers trembling as I wrapped his favorite blue scarf around my neck. The soft wool still held traces of his aftershave, and for a moment, I could almost pretend he was standing behind me, ready with one of his gentle jokes about being fashionably late. You know that hollow feeling when you think you've hit rock bottom? When you figure grief is the worst pain you'll face? Well, honey, sometimes life has other plans. The funeral home filled quickly. Familiar faces from church, Walter's old colleagues, even Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store, all offering those sad, sympathetic smiles that make your throat tight. Lindsay arrived early, giving me a quick hug before busying herself with the guest book. Eric swept in just before the service started, looking more like a CEO than a grieving son in his crisp charcoal suit. I settled into the front pew, clutching that blue scarf like an anchor. The minister spoke first, sharing memories of Walter's kindness and integrity. A few friends offered sweet stories about his volunteer work at the library. Then Eric stood up, straightening his tie as he approached the podium. I expected the usual eulogy, maybe some childhood memories, or that fishing trip story Walter loved to tell. Instead, my son cleared his throat and said words that split my world in two. Mom doesn't own anything now. I do. The room went so quiet you could hear the old heating system creak. I sat there, frozen, as Eric pulled out a document I'd never seen before. Dad trusted me to handle things properly, he continued, his voice carrying that same cold efficiency he used in his real estate deals. The new will makes everything clear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson's hand flew to her mouth. Lindsay stared at her lap, and that told me everything I needed to know about whose side she'd chosen. My fingers dug into the scarf's soft wool as Eric kept talking, but his words turned to static in my ears. This couldn't be real. Walter would never. After the service, Eric cornered me in the hallway. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he spelled it out. Dad changed everything before he died, he said, like he was discussing the weather. Your name's been removed. The house, the accounts, it's all been transferred to me. He checked his watch, already turning away. We'll talk details later. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand how he could do this on the day we buried his father. But my voice had disappeared, somewhere between the podium and that cold hallway conversation. That night I lay awake in our me bed now, I supposed staring at the ceiling and the shadows our old oak tree cast through the window. Walter and I had planted that tree the year we moved in. He'd insisted on picking the perfect spot, saying something about how its branches would dance on summer nights. Now those same branches seemed to reach toward me like accusing fingers. Sleep wasn't coming, not with my mind racing through every conversation, every document Walter and I had signed over the years. We had a will, a proper one, drawn up by Thomas Green, our family lawyer for 3 decades. First thing tomorrow, I decided, I'd drive to his office and get to the bottom of this mess. Thomas would know what to do. He had to. I pressed my face into Walter's pillow, breathing in what remained of him, and made a silent promise. Whatever game Eric was playing, whatever he thought he could take from me, I wouldn't let him erase 47 years of trust and love with a few sheets of paper, not without a fight. The next morning, I barely waited for Thomas Green's office to open. His secretary, Fran, took one look at my face and buzzed me right through. Thomas had been our family lawyer since Eric was in kindergarten. Surely he'd help sort out this nightmare. Margaret, Thomas said, rising from behind his desk. His bow tie was crooked, like always, but his expression was unusually grave. I was going to call you today. My hands trembled as I pulled Eric's copy of the will from my purse. Thomas, please tell me this isn't real. Walter and I had everything arranged years ago. You helped us do it. He gestured for me to sit, and that's when my stomach really started to sink. Thomas wasn't one for gentle gestures unless bad news was coming. I've reviewed the document thoroughly, he said, pulling out a thick folder. The will Eric presented is legally valid. It was signed and notarized 3 weeks before Walter passed. The room tilted sideways. That's impossible. Walter could barely hold a pen then, and he would have told me. The signatures match our records, Thomas continued, his voice heavy with something that sounded too much like pity. Everything appears to be in order. The house, the accounts, Walter's pension. Legally, it's all transferred to Eric's control. You know that feeling when you're swimming, and suddenly the bottom drops away? That's what hit me then. 47 years of memories, of building a home together, all erased with a few strokes of a pen I never saw. But where am I supposed to go? The words came out small, like they belonged to someone else. Thomas shuffled some papers, not quite meeting my eyes. There are some excellent senior communities in the area. The doorbell chime from the front office cut him off. Moments later, Eric strode in, pristine in another expensive suit. He didn't even look at me as he placed a white envelope on Thomas's desk. The formal notice, he said, all business. 30 days should be sufficient. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope. You're evicting me? From my own home? Dad's home, Eric corrected, finally turning those cold eyes on me. He was worried about your memory issues, Mom. The way you'd forget appointments, mix up your medications. He knew you couldn't handle managing property anymore. Memory issues? I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. I took care of your father through every chemotherapy session, every doctor's appointment. I managed all his medications and made mistakes. Eric cut in smoothly. Dad noticed. He talked to me about it often, said you were getting unreliable. The words stung like a slap. Walter had never said anything like that to me, never even hinted at it. Had he? Thomas, I pleaded, turning to the man who'd guided our family through decades of legal matters. You know this isn't right. But Thomas just adjusted his bow tie, looking uncomfortable. The law is clear in this case, Margaret. I'm sorry. I stumbled out of his office in a daze, barely registering Fran's concerned look. Once in my Carno, Eric's car, now I called Lindsay. My daughter would help. She had to. Mom? Lindsay answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. I'm actually heading into a meeting. Eric's evicting me, I blurted out. He says your father thought I was losing my mind, but that's not true. Lindsay, you know that's not true. The pause went on too long. Mom, we've all noticed changes. The time you left the stove on, the appointments you've mixed up. Maybe Eric's right. Maybe this is for the best. My own daughter. The betrayal burned worse than anything Eric had done. I drove home in a fog, barely seeing the familiar streets through my tears. Our little yellow house looked exactly the same as it had for decades, but suddenly it felt like a stranger's property. 30 days. Where does someone my age even go with just 30 days' notice? I sank into Walter's old recliner, the one he'd insisted on keeping even after the springs started creaking. The leather was worn smooth from years of crossword puzzles and evening news broadcasts. As I shifted, trying to find comfort in memories, something felt off. A strange bulge under the right armrest that hadn't been there before. I ran my fingers along the armrest's edge, feeling for any loose seams. The bulge shifted slightly under pressure, but when I finally worked the worn leather panel free, all I found were a couple of dried-up ballpoint pens and some ancient butterscotch wrappers. Walter had always loved those hard candies, keeping a stash everywhere. What were you expecting? I muttered to myself, stuffing the debris back inside. Just padding gone lumpy with age, nothing more. The disappointment hit harder than it should have. You know how grief plays tricks on your mind? Makes you see meaning in ordinary things? That's what this was. I was hunting for messages from Walter that didn't exist, while the real world was piling up around me. Speaking of which, I forced myself to look at the kitchen table, where unopened envelopes formed neat little towers. Bills don't care if you're mourning. They just keep coming, like winter rain. I picked up the first one, hands shaking slightly. The power company's logo stared back at me, probably wondering why last month's payment was late. I used to handle all this so easily. But now every envelope felt like a trap, each one potentially addressed to a woman who no longer legally existed here. Would the utilities even accept my payments anymore? Was I supposed to forward everything to Eric? My head started pounding. I needed Walter's death certificate to start sorting out these practical matters, another errand I'd been dreading. Thomas's office closed at 5, and it was already past 4. No time like the present, right? The drive back to the lawyer's office felt different in the late afternoon light. Shadows stretched longer. Buildings looked sharper. Even the familiar brick facade of Thomas's practice seemed somehow colder, less welcoming. The main office was empty except for Fran, Thomas's secretary. She'd been there as long as I could remember, quiet and efficient in her cardigan and sensible shoes, always with those reading glasses perched right at the tip of her nose. "I'm here to pick up the death certificate copies," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thomas said they'd be ready?" Fran glanced toward Thomas's closed door, then back at me. Something flickered across her face, concern, guilt. She stood slowly, adjusting those ever-present glasses. "Yes, Mrs. Wheeler, I have them right here." She pulled out a manila envelope, but didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, she seemed to be wrestling with some internal decision. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, Fran reached into her desk drawer and withdrew something small and white, a business card. "You should call this number," she whispered, sliding it across the desk like it was radioactive. Her eyes darted again to Thomas's door. "Her name is Darlene. She helps people in situations like yours." I picked up the card with trembling fingers. "Just a phone number and a name, nothing else." "What situations?" I asked, but Fran was already shaking her head. "I can't say more, but you have 28 days. She emphasized each word carefully. "Don't wait too long." My throat felt tight. "Why are you helping me?" Fran's eyes softened behind those reading glasses. Because I've worked here 30 years, Mrs. Wheeler. I've seen things, documents, timing that doesn't. Well, she straightened suddenly, professional mask sliding back into place. Will you need anything else today? I clutched both the death certificates and that mysterious card as I walked to my car, feeling like I was carrying live ammunition. 28 days. The same timeline as Eric's eviction notice, minus 2 days. Was that significant? And who was this Darlene person? The card seemed to burn in my pocket. Part of me wanted to call the number right there in the parking lot. But another part, the part that still couldn't believe any of this, was real wondered if I had the strength to deal with one more thing today. Or if it even mattered anymore. What could anyone do in 28 days to fix something this broken? I barely slept that night, that little white card sitting on my nightstand like a question mark. When the morning light finally crept through my curtains, I reached for the phone before I could talk myself out of it. The voice that answered was crisp as autumn air. Darlene speaking. My name is... I started, but she cut me straight through. Margaret Wheeler. I've been expecting your call. Fran mentioned you might need some help. There was a rustling of papers in the background. Can you meet at 9? Lou's Diner, near the courthouse? My heart skipped. How did you know my... 9 o'clock, Mrs. Wheeler. Bring that eviction notice. The line went dead. Lou's was one of those places time forgot, cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could wake the dead. I hadn't been there since Walter's doctor appointments at the nearby medical center. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and I spotted her immediately. She sat in a corner booth, short gray hair perfectly styled, reading glasses perched on her nose as she studied some document. She looked up sharply when I approached, and I saw intelligence burning in those eyes. She had to be in her mid-60s, but there was nothing soft about her. Sit, she said, gesturing to the opposite bench. Coffee? I slid into the booth, clutching my purse. Yes, please. She waved over a waitress without taking her eyes off me. 2 coffees. And bring us some pie. The good kind, Betty, not that frozen stuff. I started to protest that I wasn't hungry, but Darlene held up one finger. First rule, never discuss legal strategy on an empty stomach. She waited until the coffee arrived before continuing. Now, tell me everything. Start with when Walter got sick. So I did. I told her about the cancer diagnosis 3 years ago, the rounds of treatment, the hope, then despair, then hope again. How he'd rallied this past spring before the stroke hit him in early summer. How Eric had suddenly started visiting more often after that, bringing papers for Walter to sign. Darlene interrupted only occasionally, asking sharp questions about dates and details. When I mentioned the will being signed, her pen stopped moving. What day exactly? July 12th. Eric showed me the document yesterday. And Walter's stroke? July 5th. He could barely speak after that, much less hold a pen. I remembered those awful days, watching him struggle with the simplest tasks. Darlene's eyes narrowed. Yet somehow he signed a complex legal document 7 days later. That's what Eric claims. She set down her pen and picked up her fork, cutting deliberately into her slice of cherry pie. Mrs. Wheeler, we're not fighting Eric. We're fighting a lie. And lies leave trails. What do you mean? I mean, I need you to go home and find everything from those weeks. Medical records, visitor logs, Walter's calendar, prescription receipts, every scrap of paper that shows what was really happening when that will was supposedly signed. My hands trembled around my coffee cup. You think we can prove? I think your son made a mistake. Several, probably. But we need evidence, not theories. She pulled out her own calendar. Meet me here tomorrow, same time. Bring everything you find. That evening, I tore through the house like a woman possessed. Every drawer, every file folder, every box in the closet, in Walter's old desk, buried under warranties and instruction manuals. I found his pocket calendar. My throat tightened. He'd kept one every year since 1975, marking everything from oil changes to dentist appointments. I flipped to July, and there it was. July 12th was circled in red pen, but the handwriting wasn't Walter's shaky script. It was clean, precise, just like Eric's signature on the eviction notice. The calendar slipped from my fingers. 7 days after the stroke, 7 days after Walter lost the ability to even hold a spoon. The date stared up at me from the floor, red as an accusation. The next morning, Darlene arrived at my doorstep carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen more courtrooms than most lawyers. She didn't waste time on pleasantries, just marched straight to my dining room table and started laying out documents. "Show me everything you found," she said, pulling out her reading glasses. I spread out Walter's calendar, our medical files, and a stack of pharmacy receipts. The sight of his handwriting on the older entries made my chest tight. Remember how he'd sit at this very table every Sunday, planning out his week with that stubborn old ballpoint pen he refused to replace? Darlene picked up the calendar first, studying July's entries. "This signature here," she pointed to the circled date. "Compare it to these earlier ones." I leaned in. The difference was startling when you looked closely. Walter's real signature had always been slightly crooked, with a distinctive loop in the W. The July 12th entry was too perfect, too controlled. "Now look at this." Darlene pulled out Eric's eviction notice. "See the similarity in the pen pressure, the spacing?" My hands started shaking. Eric wrote that entry. "Keep going," Darlene urged, spreading out more papers. "What else feels wrong?" We spent hours combing through everything. Hospital discharge summaries, insurance claims, nurses' notes. Each document added another piece to the puzzle, and none of them matched Eric's story. "Here," Darlene said suddenly, holding up a pharmacy log. Walter was on heavy painkillers that entire week. Maximum dosage. She flipped through more pages. "And look at these nursing reports, July 10th. Patient non-responsive to verbal commands. July 11th. Speech severely impaired, unable to form coherent sentences." I remembered those days all too clearly. Walter had barely been able to sip water through a straw, let alone read and sign legal documents. "There's more," Darlene said, her voice getting that steel edge I was starting to recognize. I interviewed 3 nurses who were on rotation that week. All of them confirmed Walter's condition. One even remembered Eric visiting with papers, but said Walter was completely unconscious at the time. My stomach lurched. He waited until his father was unconscious, and apparently thought no one would notice. Darlene started gathering the documents into neat piles. "We have enough. The timeline alone proves fraud, but the medical records seal it. We need to get to the courthouse before it closes." The next hour was a blur of photocopies and notarized statements. By 3 o'clock, we were standing before Judge Martinez, filing an emergency motion to stay the eviction. The courtroom smelled of old wood and anxiety. The judge peered at us over his reading glasses, taking his time with each page. My legs felt like rubber. Finally, he looked up. "This is disturbing evidence, Mrs. Wheeler. Very disturbing." He turned to his clerk. "Issue a temporary stay, 10 days, and schedule a full hearing. I want to see everyone involved in this will's creation in my courtroom." Relief flooded through me so fast I had to grip the table to stay upright. 10 days. We had 10 days. But my victory was short-lived. Eric was waiting in the courthouse hallway, leaning against a marble pillar like he owned it. That familiar smirk played across his face as we approached. "Nice move, Mom," he said, straightening his designer tie. "But you'll regret it." Darlene stepped between us. Save the threats, Eric. We've got proof of fraud. Proof? He laughed, but I caught something flicker in his eyes. Fear? You've got desperate theories from a bunch of minimum wage nurses. Good luck with that. He adjusted his cuffs, a gesture so reminiscent of Walter it made my heart ache. 10 days won't change anything. You're just dragging out the inevitable. I watched him stride away down the marble hallway, his shoes clicking against the floor like a countdown. 10 days didn't feel like much time at all. Eric didn't waste any time. The very next morning, I stood at Johnson's pharmacy counter, my heart pounding as Sarah, who'd filled my prescriptions for 15 years, swiped my card again. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wheeler. It's still declining. She lowered her voice. Could there be an issue with your account? My cheeks burned. Let me call the bank. But the bank couldn't help. According to them, Eric had submitted paperwork questioning my mental competency. They'd frozen everything, pending investigation. I clutched my empty pill bottle, the one I desperately needed refilled. I can front you the money, Sarah offered, but I shook my head. Pride's a funny thing even when you're desperate. Back home, I called Medicare, hoping to sort out at least that part. The hold music played for 45 minutes before a tired voice informed me that my benefits were under review. Under review? My voice cracked. I've had the same coverage for years. Yes, ma'am. But we received documentation from your power of attorney indicating possible cognitive decline. My what? The room started spinning. I never gave Eric power of attorney. Our records show it was filed last week, ma'am. Your son provided medical assessments. I hung up. The walls of my kitchen seemed to close in. How had he moved so fast? When had he gotten doctors to sign off on this? You ever notice how trouble comes in waves? By that Thursday, I'd missed 3 doses of my blood pressure medication. The headache started Tuesday. By Wednesday night, my vision was getting spotty. I probably shouldn't have gone to the grocery store, but a person's gotta eat. I was reaching for a can of soup, the cheap kind, now that my accounts were frozen when the floor tilted sideways. The fluorescent lights blurred into streaks. I heard the can clatter away as my knees buckled. Ma'am? Ma'am? A woman's voice floated somewhere above me. Someone call an ambulance. Kind hands helped me onto something flat. Faces swam in and out of focus. Someone was taking my pulse, asking questions I couldn't quite grasp. Blood pressure's through the roof, a paramedic muttered. How long since your last medication? I tried to answer, but my tongue felt thick. The ceiling of the ambulance replaced the grocery store lights. More questions, more concerned faces. They wanted to admit me, but I refused. Medicare was blocked, remember? The bill would have ruined me. So they dropped me home with strict instructions and worried looks. I collapsed into Walter's old recliner, the one that still smelled faintly of his aftershave. The tears came then, hot and angry and helpless. Was this what he'd wanted? To see me broken, begging? Walter, I whispered to the empty room. I don't know if I can do this anymore. The house creaked its lonely answer. Outside, rain started pattering against the windows. The same windows Eric wanted to replace with energy-efficient models last year. Everything familiar suddenly felt temporary, slipping through my fingers like water. A knock at the door startled me. It was Darlene, holding a covered pot and wearing that no-nonsense expression of hers. Heard you had some excitement today, she said, making her way to my kitchen like she owned it. Brought chicken soup. The real kind, not that canned nonsense. How did you? Small town, news travels. She was already pulling out bowls. Sarah from the pharmacy called me. We're working on a way around the Medicare block, by the way, and I've got a friend at First National who might be able to help with the accounts. I slumped at the kitchen table. Maybe Eric's right. Maybe I am too old for this fight. Darlene slapped a bowl of soup in front of me with enough force to make me jump. People who win never give up in the middle. She pointed her spoon at me. and you're nowhere near the middle yet. The soup's steam carried the scent of rosemary and thyme, real herbs, just like Walter used to grow in our little garden. I took a shaky breath, then a spoonful. "Now," Darlene said, settling across from me with her own bowl, "let's talk about what we're going to do next." After Darlene left, I couldn't settle. The house felt too quiet, too empty. You know those nights when your mind just won't stop spinning? This was one of those. I pulled Walter's old cardigan from the closet, the brown one with leather patches on the elbows that he'd refused to throw away. It still smelled like him, that mix of pipe tobacco and that drugstore aftershave he loved. I wandered into the living room, where shadows played across Walter's recliner. Funny how a piece of furniture can hold so many memories. I'd watched him read the paper there every morning for decades, heard him snore through countless Sunday football games. My fingers traced the worn fabric, remembering that strange bulge I'd noticed before. In the quiet of night, everything feels different, more possible somehow. I pressed harder this time, exploring every inch. There, just under the armrest, something felt wrong. Not lumpy like padding, but rigid. When my thumb hit a certain spot, a soft click made me jump. A small panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment I'd never known existed. "Walter, you old fox. What else had you kept from me?" Inside lay a single USB stick, no bigger than my pinky. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The plastic was slightly dusty, but otherwise unmarked. I hadn't touched my laptop in months. It sat on the desk in our spare room, buried under a stack of magazines. Took me a few minutes just to remember where I'd put the power cord. The screen flickered to life, that familiar blue glow filling the dark room. The USB stick clicked into place. A single folder appeared, labeled simply, "In case." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Double-clicking felt like stepping off a cliff. And there he was. Walter's face filled the screen, recorded in what looked like our backyard. He was sitting in his garden chair, wearing that blue plaid shirt I'd always liked. This must have been just before the stroke. His face was thin, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "Hello, sweetheart." His voice cracked slightly, and I pressed a hand to my mouth. "If you're watching this, it means Eric's tried something. I've been watching him, seeing how he looks at the house, at our accounts, the way he talks about asset management when he thinks I'm not listening." Walter leaned closer to the camera. "So I'm leaving this. The truth. Everything we own, the house, the accounts, my pension, it's all jointly held. You're full co-owner, always have been. I've got the paperwork locked in a safety deposit box at First National, box 247. The keys taped under this USB stick. I scrambled to check. Sure enough, a small key was hidden there. I've written everything down," Walter continued. "Dates, account numbers, every detail about how I want things managed. Eric can't touch any of it without your signature. If he's tried to change that..." Walter's face hardened in a way I'd rarely seen. "Well, this video proves my mental state, and there's more evidence in that safety deposit box." The screen started to fade, but not before I heard him say, "I love you, Margaret, don't let them." The video ended. I sat there in the dark, clutching the laptop to my chest, tears streaming down my face, but these weren't tears of despair anymore. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something else burning in my chest. Hope. Walter hadn't abandoned me. He'd been protecting me all along, waiting in silence like a chess player who'd seen 10 moves ahead. That clever, wonderful man had prepared. I reached for my phone to call Darlene, then stopped. No, this was too precious, too powerful to risk over a phone line. This had to be handled perfectly. Tomorrow would be soon enough. The USB stick felt warm in my palm as I carefully removed it. Such a tiny thing, to hold so much power. Such a small key, to unlock my future. I met Darlene at her office first thing the next morning, my hands shaking as I handed over the USB stick. The room was small but neat, with case files stacked in precise towers along one wall. She plugged it into her computer without a word. When Walter's face appeared on screen, I watched Darlene's expression. Nothing. Not a twitch, not a blink. She just leaned forward slightly, those sharp eyes taking in every detail. The video played through. Walter's voice filled the quiet office, laying out his concerns about Eric, detailing our joint ownership, explaining the safety deposit box. Only when it ended did Darlene finally move, sitting back in her chair with a slow exhale. "Well," she said, "looks like we're going to court today." She picked up her phone and started dialing. "Judge Martinez owes me a favor. We're getting an emergency hearing." Everything moved fast after that. By 2 o'clock, I was sitting in courtroom C of the county courthouse, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was packed, seems word had gotten around. I spotted at least 3 local reporters in the back row. Eric sat at the defendant's table, looking less polished than usual. His suit was wrinkled, and dark circles ringed his eyes. He wouldn't look at me. Judge Martinez entered, a tall woman with steel gray hair pulled back severely. "I understand we have new evidence," she said, glancing at our table. "Proceed." Darlene stood. "Your Honor, we have video testimony from Walter Barnes, recorded shortly before his stroke, directly contradicting the will that Mr. Eric Barnes presented." The bailiff wheeled in a TV monitor. When Walter's face appeared on screen, I heard Eric's sharp intake of breath. The courtroom fell silent as Walter spoke. His voice was clear, his intentions crystal: joint ownership, his suspicions about Eric, the safety deposit box. When he detailed how he wanted the estate managed, Eric's lawyer started scribbling frantically. Judge Martinez's expression darkened as the video played on. By the time it ended, she was gripping her gavel so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Mr. Barnes," she said, fixing Eric with a stare that could have melted steel, "would you care to explain why you presented a will dated after your father suffered a debilitating stroke? A will that directly contradicts his clearly stated intentions?" Eric's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Your Honor," his lawyer jumped in, "we contest the authenticity of this video." "Save it," Judge Martinez cut him off. "This requires further investigation. All current proceedings are stayed pending a full inquiry into potential fraudulent conduct." She turned to me. "Mrs. Barnes, are you willing to testify about these matters in detail?" I thought about Walter's voice on that video, about all the years we'd shared, about the trust he'd placed in me. I stood up straight. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." The gavel came down hard. "Court is adjourned until further notice. Mr. Barnes, do not leave the county." She fixed Eric with one last withering look before sweeping out. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps as we left. I saw camera flashes, heard shouted questions. Eric pushed through them with his coat over his head, practically running to his car. I stepped out more slowly, Darlene at my side. The spring sky was startlingly bright after the dim courtroom. A warm breeze carried the scent of blooming dogwood trees. "You did good in there," Darlene said quietly. I nodded, watching Eric's car peel out of the parking lot. My son, me own flesh and blood, had tried to steal everything from me, had called me incompetent, had frozen my accounts, had nearly made me homeless, and now everyone would know. "What happens next?" I asked. I sat in the witness box 2 days later, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. You could have heard a pin drop as I began my testimony. Walter's decline started slowly, I explained, my voice steadier than I'd expected. By March, he could barely hold a spoon. The stroke on April 3rd left him unable to speak clearly or write his name. The prosecutor displayed Walter's medical charts on a large screen. "And this signature," she said, pointing to the disputed will, "was supposedly made on April 10th? "Yes, a week after he couldn't even hold a pen." I glanced at Eric, who was staring intently at his legal pad. Dr. Martinez, Walter's neurologist, testified next. She walked the court through brain scans, medication logs, and daily care notes. "In my professional opinion," she stated firmly, "Mr. Barnes was physically and mentally incapable of executing legal documents during that period." The nursing staff's testimonies followed. Each one confirmed Walter's condition: the slurred speech, the tremors, his confusion. Sarah, his day nurse, described trying to help him drink water the day the will was supposedly signed. "He couldn't even grip the cup," she said softly. Judge Martinez's ruling came down like thunder. "This court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud," she declared. "The will dated April 10th is hereby void. Furthermore, given the egregious nature of this deception, I am referring this matter to the State Real Estate Commission for review of Mr. Eric Barnes's license." I heard a sharp intake of breath from Eric's direction. "Additionally," the judge continued, "I am ordering a full forensic audit of all transactions related to the Barnes estate since Walter Barnes's first hospitalization." Outside, reporters clustered thick as summer mosquitoes. Camera flashes popped as Eric pushed through them, ignoring questions about client trust accounts and professional misconduct. "Mr. Barnes, is it true your brokerage partners are distancing themselves? Eric, will you appeal the suspension of your license? What do you say to accusations of elder abuse?" I stayed inside with Darlene until most of them dispersed. When we finally emerged, only one reporter remained, Jenny from the local paper. I'd known her since she was in my library reading group. "Mrs. Barnes," she said gently, "would you like to make a statement?" I thought about it. Just this: trust is earned, blood doesn't buy it. By the time I got home, my story was already breaking across local news. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. Seems Eric's real estate empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. 3 major clients had already pulled their listings. I was fixing myself a cup of tea when the call came. Eric's new lawyer, all polite venom, informed me they'd be filing a countersuit first thing tomorrow. Their claim? That I had manipulated Walter during his illness, turning him against his own son. My hand shook so bad I nearly dropped the phone. I called Darlene immediately. "He's countersuing," I managed to get out. "Says I manipulated Walter." "Let him try," Darlene cut in, cool as December frost. "You know what happens to people who dig holes when they're already in one?" "What?" "They just get deeper." She paused. "Besides, we still haven't played our trump card. The safety deposit box Walter mentioned in the video? I picked up the key this morning. Want to go see what your husband left us? You know what's funny about revenge? Sometimes it arrives gift-wrapped by the very person who wronged you. And sometimes, like now, it comes in a small metal box, just waiting to be opened." "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes, I said. That safety deposit box sealed Eric's fate. Inside were transaction records, each annotated in Walter's handwriting. Though dying, he'd tracked every suspicious move our son made. "Look at these dates," Darlene said, spreading papers on her table. "Eric moved money right after getting power of attorney, starting small then larger. Walter's video had warned us. Watch the trail." He'd known all along. The investigators traced 180 zero in unauthorized transfers to Eric's accounts, uncovered fake investment schemes using our home as collateral, and found forged loan documents predating the fraudulent will. His legal team abandoned him. I was gardening when Darlene called. "His attorneys withdrew," she said triumphantly. "The countersuit's dismissed." "It's over?" "Almost. Your property titles are being reinstated." That evening, I walked through my house mine again. I touched the wallpaper Walter and I had chosen, the kitchen counter where we'd shared countless coffees. Eric had tried stealing these memories. Headlines blazed, prominent realtor faces criminal charges, and Barnes' real estate empire crumbles. Lindsay called, hesitant. "Mom, I didn't know. Can we talk?" I told her I needed time. Forgiveness can't be rushed. In Walter's dresser, I found his dirt-stained gardening gloves from his last day tending roses. I held them, remembering his capable hands that had protected me even after death. Darlene called about criminal charges, fraud, elder abuse, forgery. "You doing okay?" Looking at Walter's gloves, I said, "I don't feel happy, just peaceful, because you wanted justice, not revenge." She was right. Surrounded by our memories, I felt quiet certainty. Tomorrow, I'd plan my spring garden. Walter would have liked that. 3 weeks after the court's ruling, I stood in my backyard on what would have been Walter's and my 48th anniversary. The morning dew clung to the grass as a mockingbird sang from the oak tree. I'd chosen a peace rose bush with creamy yellow blooms that blush pink, Walter's favorite, reminiscent of sunrise. I held his old trowel, its wooden handle still bearing his grip's impression. "Need help?" Lindsay's voice came from the garden gate. She held a hardware store bag, and my heart twisted with mixed emotions. She'd been trying to make amends, but some wounds needed time. "I need to do this myself," I said gently. She left the bag. "I brought mulch and those plant food spikes Dad liked." Her voice caught. "Thank you, but I still need time." "I know. I should have believed you," questioned Eric. "I failed you, Mom." The mockingbird's song reminded me of Walter's whistling. "You did," I agreed, "but you're here now. When you're ready, I'd like to help with the garden again." Looking at her father's warm brown eyes in her face, I said, "Maybe when summer flowers need planting." After she left, I worked the rich soil, following Walter's old instructions. The rose bush settled perfectly, and I used Lindsay's supplies. Walter's weathered gloves lay beside me on the bench. I could almost see him there, sharing his garden wisdom. Every flower has its season, just like people. Running my thumb over his gloves, I whispered, "Thank you." The sun caught the dew on new leaves. I wasn't just a widow anymore, but a woman who'd found her strength, a mother learning to forgive, a gardener planting future memories. I arranged Walter's gloves on the bench and whistled back to the mockingbird just as he'd taught me. The newspaper landed on my doorstep that Wednesday morning. Eric's face dominated the Macon Telegraph's front page, the son who stole a widow's home. I didn't need to read it, but found myself unfolding those crisp pages anyway. The story exposed everything: his manipulation of Walter's final days, forged documents, and attempts to strip me of everything. The reporter had uncovered other victims of Eric's creative real estate dealings. He'd been mishandling trust accounts for years. The state financial board permanently barred him. Every Georgia bank flagged his name. His downtown office stood empty, a for lease sign, as forlorn as his repossessed Mercedes. "He filed for bankruptcy this morning," Darlene called to say. Chapter 7. Total liquidation. Sitting in Walter's recliner mine now, I felt only sadness. I keep thinking about when he was 6, with his broken arm. How he cried for me, not the doctors. "You can miss who he was," Darlene said. "Just don't forget who he became." I used the settlement money to establish a small foundation helping elderly women fight financial abuse. No fanfare, just quiet help for quiet battles. Walter would have approved. The garden became my sanctuary. Each morning, I'd bring coffee to Walter's bench, watching his beloved peace roses bloom yellow and pink. His weathered gardening gloves remained where I'd left them, sometimes hosting neighborhood cats. Lindsay joined me some mornings with Amy, her 4-year-old who loved watering flowers. One day, Amy lifted Walter's gloves. Grandma, why do you keep these here? I watched a mockingbird nearby. To remind me that love, trust, and respect must be earned daily. The roses outlasted the scandal, the whispers, and my anger. They proved what Walter knew. Beauty grows best in soil turned by hardship, nourished by truth, and tended with patience. I never saw Eric again. But on Walter's bench, watching those roses bloom, I understood. Trust is earned. Blood doesn't buy it. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.